So, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today, I am delighted to be joined for the second time by Melissa Cuimmei, investor, researcher, and full-time anti-government activist. Melissa, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, not a problem. So, if people don't know, we had you on the show before a couple of years ago during the pandemic to talk about some of the anti freedom measures, shall we say, and to discuss some of the stuff about possibility of CBDCs being introduced, digital ID, and that sort of thing. And now we're back to talk a little bit about the Northern Ireland Public Health Bill and maybe some other stuff. So the Northern Ireland Public Health Bill was proposing permanent emergency powers, advocating for some potentially forced medical exams, quarantine, vaccination, and some other quite horrifying things in the language of the proposed legislation. So that's why it came across my desk. But what was your initial reaction when you saw this coming out? Like, why do you think this is being done now, after long after COVID's gone?
Well, COVID was the beta test to see that if they could bring this in, because the ultimate goal is to remove our human and inalienable rights. So they were suspended during the COVID pandemic, and now this is a move to cement these powers into legislation. I didn't find out about it. All MLAs have had this from the start of July, as has the Bar Association of Civil Servants. This only came across my desk about 2 weeks before the initial end of the public consultation, which was the 27th of September. And I have been sounding the alarm, and everybody seems to have moved around to kind of move towards fighting against this proposal. There was a consultation with 6,000 signatures that was taken down within 36 hours. There was like 2,500 to 3,000 people on the streets of Belfast, all completely opposed to this. It wasn't a meaningful consultation. It didn't meet the consultation principles, and it's trying to be railroaded through like they did in Scotland under the coronavirus, I think, reform, and I can't remember. It received royal assent in 2022, August of 2022. They're also trying to bring this in through Canada in the C293 bill, New Zealand, Australia. So basically, the pandemic treaty has failed on a macro level. So there's now a move to bring this in a micro level through different areas and then leave it out.
So when you say the pandemic treaty, you mean the UN World Health Organization treaty, am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, which was proposed basically, I think last year, was it? And well, I mean,
This year, yeah.
Was it this year or last year? Let's just look that
I
up.
think it was pulled down. It was pulled down this year. They have been pushing for it from the start of the pandemic. That was the objective, was to cement these powers into legislation so that they could supersede our rights. Robin Swan tried to continue to bring these powers, the emergency powers. He tried to continue and continue. Ultimately, that was voted against. So it's very strange that any of the other parties would be even considering this when they have voted to remove it. I don't understand why they're completely against this in every aspect.
So essentially, they failed worldwide, attempting to put this in from the top down, and now they're attempting to bring it in from the bottom up in individual nations. So that's what brought us to the Northern Ireland Health Bill.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that everyone focused in on to begin with was page 47. So I believe you have it there to read out for us what exactly they say in it.
I do. And the thing about page 47 is that it's almost identical to the page. It's from 86B onwards on the Scottish bill. So it seems to be a cookie cutter being rolled out. But page 47 is forced vaccination, forced to be put into a hospital or suitable establishment. They don't say what that is. So it's incarceration. The forced isolation, forced to wear protective clothing, forced reprogramming, your health monitored by force, forced to stay off work. So basically, it's stripping the majority of your rights in that one page.
Yeah, it's really concerning. Mike Nesbitt said on the topic, our current public health legislative framework needs to be updated in order that Northern Ireland can respond to 21st century public health emergencies. The overarching principle of the legislation is to protect our citizens against various forms of infection and contamination, including biological, chemical, and radiological, in addition to our current legislation, which focuses on infectious disease. The Public Health Bill will give the Public Health Agency powers to investigate, risk assess, and respond to infectious diseases and other infections or contaminations that affect public health. It will bring our public health legislation into further alignment internationally and provide the department with powers to make regulations that clarify the roles and responsibilities of those tasked with delivering new health protection measures. I think the thing that was really worrying to me was what you honed in on, the hospital or suitable establishment. I was like, well, that's a bit big. And yeah, in my experience, all sort of gray areas in legislation are open to abuse by whichever agency might be administering said powers, because it gives them scope to define what they mean by suitable. Difficult. And then the other thing was they can keep you off work for 28 days, which was really, really disturbingly worrying. I couldn't work out how they planned to get this through. And thankfully, there was, as you said, a huge outcry against this. And it seems like they've backed off a little bit, at least for now. And they're going to come back with new proposals, I think, some point next year is the plan. But there was something about you thought that, okay, we don't need to worry so much about page 47 as much anymore, because they plan to, or you believe that they plan to remove some of the more onerous parts of that set of rules. What is it that you're concerned about now?
Well, page 47 is what they plan to do, which is lockdown on steroids. But I don't think, for starters, that they're planning to remove any of this. There's not 1% of this bill that has anything got to do with public health. I would expect this to be debated in the Assembly by early next summer. This is where we need to really target our MLAs and go through and break it down to them and ask them what part are they in favour of, because should they remove the forced vaccination and prophylactic, they don't define what a prophylactic is, where they're planning to force statins, who knows? Everything, as you say, is completely vague. It's significant risk. It's may be infected. It's to reduce risk. These are all unquantifiable terms that they're talking in. But should they remove the forced vaccination and prophylactic, well then what are you left with in the hive? Because it's infection, contamination, and all hazards. Those are listed. Those are three separate words in the document. But what is the definition of all hazards? Is that man-made disaster, natural disasters? Is it economic instability? Is it cyber attacks on banking? Is it disruption to public services? What is that? And within this document, the Public Health Authority, when there is one of these vague hazards, they have the authority to step in and take control. And if you look at point 188 and I think 190, they also have the power of veto. So in a perceived emergency, the Public Health Authority become the ultimate authority in Northern Ireland. So what does that mean? It means that they can create a second-tier court system and a second-tier policing system, the authorized officers. So this is giving them permanent powers to go above the rule of law in the way that evidence is gathered. They can come into your home now to see if there is a contravention. They can have a court order placed against you if you are showing signs and so without you having the right to be there to hear, see, and test the evidence. So this can be done ex parte. You don't have to be there. The justice of the peace, what has to be presented to the justice of the peace is if you display signs and symptoms. Well, if you remember a few years back, having no symptoms was a symptom. A test, a diagnostic test. Well, we know that the PCR test was questionable, or by contact. So this then, if you go beyond that, is changing what reasonable suspicion is within the courts. So reasonable suspicion is now not medical evidence. They can achieve all of this based on the experts define what the risk is, and it will be a computer model. So it's completely changing the rule of law and rewriting the rule of law and changing the rules of the magistrates court and anything that they deem to be a risk, whether you think it's a risk or not.
Yeah, that it's really disturbing. I've just got up some of the stuff from page 47 here. The other thing that was really, really disturbing to me was in relation to a person, regulations may impose a special restriction or requirement, such as some of the stuff requiring a person to submit the medical examination, remove the suitable establishment, but then keep a person in quarantine or isolation. There's no that's just there. It doesn't say for how long. That's indefinitely. That the person wear protective clothing. So they want to be able to force people to wear ineffective masks, essentially, or I don't know, something worse, possibly. I don't know. But the opposite,
a suitable establishment, that's incarceration. Let's call it for what it is. That's incarceration. And you might have no symptoms. This could be based on a test or based on contact tracing. So we have, in Northern Ireland, we have had internment. That's where you were held without trial. This is actually worse because you can be convicted without you having the right to be there in court to hear, see, and test the evidence. The evidence that is no longer medical evidence anymore. It's the opinion of experts.
Yeah, and I think for anyone listening to this being like, you guys are being too paranoid or too just cynical about what this sort of legislation might be used for. I think the issue is for a lot of people is that it's so open to abuse. All you need is the wrong people in someone who desires to have someone quarantined for anything, because of how vague the legislation is, it means that they can determine what the terms of what is the reason that you might need to be detained in a suitable establishment.
It's explicitly said in point 124. It says that the court considers it necessary to do so, a magistrate's court order. But if the court considers it necessary to do so, the court may make an order without a person having been given such notice as is otherwise required to be given to that person under magistrates' courts rules and regulations. So there, it's explicitly stating in point 124 that they're going against what is otherwise required because you are now a perceived risk. And point 126 does say that the evidence given to the Justice of Peace are the signs and symptoms, the person's recent contact, and the person's diagnosis. So should that have been applied during the previous lockdown, if you think of everybody doing those tests and being found positive, would they all have been detained in suitable establishments? Well, that, but based on point 126, could have been given to a Justice of the Peace, and yes, they could have been incarcerated.
It's really worrying, the language they put in, and
it's very vague. Like I say, it may be infected to reduce risk, so it's all entirely vague, because it's going to be based on a computer model, which is becoming an intangible rather than tangible evidence and risk.
Yeah, look at Neil Ferguson's COVID early models that they were basing things on. It just didn't play out to be true. And it's like, okay, people turn out to be wrong, which is fine. Experts or
not if you're in court though. If they're wrong.
Yeah, no,
you're incarcerated.
Yeah, well, agreed. But my point is that if we, it's fine for people to be wrong. And for experts to model things incorrectly. The problem is when it becomes that you can detain people based on said incorrect modeling. Do you know what I mean? It's when that interpretation becomes gospel essentially, and becomes the thing by which you make every other decision. You can allow people to be wrong without saying that, okay, well, as a result of them, that one person producing a model that the Department of Health wants to follow, you can have all of these emergency powers out of nowhere with no consideration for, as you said, that the rights that were meant to be afforded by you know being part of a Western liberalized democracy.
Well, that's the ultimate goal. So if you want a one world government and a one world currency, you need to remove these pesky rights that people have. So how would you remove rights? Because you're going to have a battle on your hands to remove rights. But there was a parity argument, parliamentary committee recommendation parity argument, that if lockdowns, this was to force vaccinate, if lockdowns were not against your human rights, or were not a violation of your human rights, then it could be argued that forced vaccination wasn't. There was another party argument that if you're mentally ill, they can force medical on you, and therefore that could be used as a party argument. So right now, it can be used as a party argument that because we allowed for our human rights to be suspended during the lockdown, is it even a human right anymore? And they want to legislate on that, when really we need to wake up and realize we can never let that happen again. Because your rights you do have your rights, but what are they dependent on? That you do no harm. So if they create you to be a perceived harm, then you lose your rights. And that's what this document creates, that you are a theoretical harm. And you don't have your rights anymore based on the PCR test, based on contact tracing. Theoretically, you are a risk.
Wow. There's a paper here. I'm just looking on Science Direct. Hang on, let me pull this up for people to be able to see. I'll read it out for you. Psychiatric disorders, and especially severe mental illness, are associated with an increased risk of a severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus infection, and COVID-19 related morbidity and mortality. People with severe mental illness should therefore be prioritized in vaccine allocation strategies. Wow. They're really trying to figure out ways to force things on people. That's disturbing. So your conception is
it's turning Northern Ireland into like a petri dish, where surveillance and monitoring is mentioned quite a few times within the document. So it's this idea that there can be no harm. And that is not the way life is, and it's not the way criminal law works either. But they're trying to force this protectionism. What this is forced protectionism. So if you don't accept this protection from the government, you're going to be criminalized. So they're creating this criminal liability for not accepting protection. But then they can extend that. So if you give up your bodily autonomy and right to informed consent, then we can protect you, which they can't. And then they extend that to surveillance. If you just give up your privacy and your biometric data, we can protect you. And ultimately that would extend to the economy. Should there be a cyber attack, etc., if you just give up your freedom to transact, we can protect you. So this forced protectionism within the document. What the news outlets are saying is that, it allows for exemptions. Well, an exemption is a permit instead of informed consent. We already have informed consent. We do not need a permit to replace that. That goes against the Nuremberg Code. So it's atrocious the way that media are reporting this. They're not reporting any of these wider issues. They're very focused on page 47, particularly the vaccination. And it does actually explicitly state that there will be a forced vaccination and prophylactic. It states that within the document, because if it wasn't forced, why would you need an exemption?
Yeah. Why do you think? So what?
And court ordered health measures.
Specific
The
provisions.
government can also, the government can also seize your property. The government can destroy your property. So now we're treading on to the government in an emergency will have authority then over not only over your body, they will have authority over your personal belongings where they can seize them. They will have authority over your premises where they can destroy it, and authority over your animals, because the thing that they refer to includes animals. And I would suspect that would be agricultural animals, and farmers are already under attack with the recent budget. So they would really need to be paying attention to that, because what is omitted in all of this document, when you're forced to stay off work for 28 days, possibly more if you retest, children forced to stay off school. But what about the financial burden of that? What happens if you're off work? Are you going to be paid? Is your employer having to pay? It doesn't say anything about that. So theoretically, you'll be off work without pay. If you're forced into isolation, isolation is a lot different than quarantine. If you are a single parent, what happens to your children? If you're forced into isolation, will your children be coming with you? Will your children, if there's nobody there to look after them, will they go into care? It's so intricate that to try and railroad this through, as Mike Nesbitt says, at pace, is beyond negligent.
It's disturbing. Like, so, I mean, I guess the ultimate goal here is that them wanting to put in some sort of regime that will allow them to make people more and more reliant on the state, and eventually to the point where we can't survive without the state.
Well, yes, that's the ultimate goal, but it's also to bring in surveillance so that if you're monitored for your health, and that would be bringing in the Epic Encompass, the Epic software, the Encompass program. They're ready to roll that out in Northern Ireland. They've already brought that in. And I think we spoke about that the last time. And that says that the MyCare app, we're all going to be given the MyCare app, and moved into virtual clinics. I don't know how anybody thinks that's a good idea. We're already kind of semi there. I haven't been able to get a doctor's appointment. The best that you can do, if you're really lucky and you're persistent, is get a phone call from the doctor. So then it's really about monitoring your health, not promoting. There's nothing in this bill that's any way promotes health. It's strictly about monitoring health and enforcing healthcare.
So, like, why do you think they are so insistent on that? Like, what is it that they need to be able to do, essentially?
For me, if you think of what the end goal is, like I said, it's one world government and one world currency. So this forced protectionism, it was so successful 4 years ago, because when your health is at risk, people do get scared. So they're trying to get it in through the back door of public health. The idea that the government, they can protect you. And then they extend that out towards surveillance, they extend that out towards the economy. And then we move into it's socialism, communism, whatever steps you want to take towards that. That will be the end goal. So this bill, currently we govern with, we're not ruled over. But when you start losing trust in your government, the only alternative is to be ruled over. So they're anticipating that we're going to lose trust in them, and they're putting it into place. They're creating the foundation that we will be ruled over within this bill. And if we don't like it, we can be criminalized on theoretical suspicion.
Okay, so you're proposing that the need here is that we're like approaching a point in the near to not so distant future where the government will lose the consent of the governed, and they will be forced to expand their own powers and scope of ability to intervene in our lives in order to ensure that they don't lose the positions of power that they have acquired. Would that be about right?
Yes, because when people realize that there's no money, it's all debt, and there's no backing to any of this, and the financial financialization of the economy is failing. So the economy has been increasingly financialized. So people are making money from money rather than from production, consumption, manufacturing. So there's a financialized house of cards has been built. So you have everything, you have your real assets, and those real assets have been bet against, borrowed against, insured against, and so on. That's where the money is made from the money. That's now in free fall. So they're going after the real assets. And within this bill, the Canadian bill, the C293 bill, makes a provision explicitly that the government can take your property if it can be expropriated for a better use in a pandemic. The Canadian bill isn't explicitly saying the forced vaccination. This bill is allowing for the government to seize and destroy your property based on a theoretical risk. So now, like I say, they're having authority over your property. So they're going after the real assets. And like we spoke about with the recent budget in the UK, they're going after assets. Because the assets, what's real, the financialization is falling. And when people start to realize this, they're going to wake up, they're going to rebel, and they need an authoritarian government to rule over them, to keep them in check.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the Canada bill as well now that you've mentioned that. It says, after consultation, Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Minister of Industry, blah, 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 provide measures to reduce risk posed by antimicrobial resistance. Okay. Promote commercial activities that can help reduce pandemic risk, including the production of alternative proteins, and phase out commercial activities that disproportionately contribute to pandemic risk, including activities that involve high-risk species. After consultation, a summary of changes in land use, blah, 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 regulate. Like, yeah, it's really, really worrying that they have. Do you know what part about seizing property is? I'm just trying to find it so I can read it for people.
It's repurpose your property. So it's expropriation of property for pandemic related purposes. They can expropriate your property if it's needed for pandemic related purposes. They can also restrict what kind of foods can be produced and sold during a pandemic. If certain animals are at risk for spreading diseases.
I mean, like this is like this really pervasive problem. It's like, I understand, right, that say we were in a situation like where there was a pandemic, that COVID-19, let's take for example, had been all the things that they thought it could be, right? In that, like, it was horribly infectious, really dangerous to people, was hospitalizing people at the initially assumed rates, and that the infection fatality rate was like what they initially were projecting when it first sort of emerged, right? And I can see the like logical arguments to say, right, well, in a time like that, let's say it's being spread by cows, like, you know, you got like bovine TB, right? If you get that, you have to like immediately quarantine your entire farm in the UK at least. And then you cannot like start trading again as a farmer until you're completely clear. I understand that those powers can be really necessary and really useful for governments to stop things that could get out of hand very quickly and be really damaging to a nation, right? I think that the problem comes when it gets really vague, and even more disturbingly, when things get so they take like this premise of needing like certain powers to try and like deal with emergencies rapidly, which seems like very, very like innocuously like, oh well, that seems fair enough on the surface, and then the more you read into it and understand like the scope of the powers that they're theoretically granting themselves, that's when it becomes really scary for me. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, well, what they're saying is in this one that Mike Nesbitt says something along the lines of we're learning from the recent public health crisis or something like that, words to those effect. But first of all, the COVID inquiry hasn't even concluded, and it was Chris Whitty said that they overstated what it was. The government are telling us, our government that we elected, are telling us that they don't trust us to do the right thing. Therefore, they need to legislate. I think if there was a genuine crisis, people would need to be told. People would do the right thing. They would be genuinely scared. But the evidence is now in. Kathy Gray has put in freedom of information from the start, and she has put in one a few weeks ago. And through the entire 4 years in Northern Ireland, 277 people have died from COVID alone. And that actually includes people who have died from pneumonia.
Really?
So all of those measures, that's anybody can put in that freedom of information and get that information for themselves. Now there's 2 deaths and I think 58 reported deaths from taking the jab. And there's 5,166 adverse reactions, and that's only the reported ones. So this is what they're basing this on. So we had a right to be dubious of what we were being told at the time. And now the evidence is in that there was no pandemic. Now, out of that, at the start, she put in freedom of information through the 16-month time frame of the pandemic. And around that, 366 deaths exclusively from COVID, no other comorbidities. And then if you look at flu deaths through that time, flu deaths disappeared. And the flu deaths would be around about 11 per month on average. Because when you die, it's not old age that's putting. You can die of flu, but you tend to be like 95, and it's a flu that's written down on it as cause of death. But flu disappeared. So there was statistically, there is no evidence now for the pandemic. And there's no evidence then for the measures that were imposed on us. Now, they had this evidence at the time. They have this evidence before they started rolling out any of the mandates, but yet they pursued them. So I would say that they're not to be trusted because they have this evidence. Kathy Gray has sent this evidence to Mike Nesbitt. She sent it all across. They come back and say, and then there's also, if you go into NISRA, death rates are statistically up. They're normally sit around 15,500. They're now at 17,500. There's no investigation into why death rates are up. They suggested that it was just demographic issue of old age within these deaths. They didn't even click on the data that she had provided because she had provided a full analysis of the breakdown of the demographic, and it's younger people that were dying.
I didn't know the death rates were up. And why do you think that that's not covered? Like, surely that would be like a really concerning thing for our public health officials.
I would think so. I mean, during the pandemic year, 2020, there was, I think, 1,933 deaths in the April. But that was, I think, there's about 270 of them around that were in care homes. So people weren't receiving treatment. That was admitted in the COVID inquiry that people were dying at home with heart attacks because they were told stay at home, protect the NHS. So they weren't going for treatment. So during that year, yes, deaths, if you remove the NHS, deaths are going to be up. But why are they up, and up again? There's no, I can't. For me, it goes beyond just taking part in this clinical trial. If you have removed your GP, which is the gatekeeper to your health, well, then more people are going to die. There's been no move to get GPs back in action where you can actually physically get a one-to-one. And for most people, you give up if you have something wrong with you, unless there's something persistently wrong with you or an aggravated pain that you can't bypass. People just give up after 3 days of phoning that, oh no, there's no appointments left. So that is going to increase. The death rates are going to increase in Northern Ireland, and absolutely no media are looking at it. No government body are looking at it. They'll be made aware of the statistics, and yet they just don't want to know.
Do you think they actually read, like, because my basic question is, like, right, who is the one that's like really ultimately in the knowledge that things are happening, because like, right, okay, let's try and be generous to Mike Nesbitt or Robin Swan in the way they were. Like, they think there's a dangerous pandemic because experts have told him, right? He's been told COVID's really dangerous. People need to stay at home. They need everyone needs to get the vaccination, and he just like inherently trusts the the medical experts that he's surrounded by, right? And then coming across his desk are reports from people he doesn't know who are not credentialed in the same way that perhaps the people around him are, or perhaps they are, and he just thinks, oh well, they're just one independent like quack. Like, how much do you think that the politicians who are pushing these things are actually aware of the like death warrants of freedom for our rights that they're signing? Like, do you think they know what they're actually doing? Is my question, or is it like, are they being pushed by like lobby groups or like somewhat donors, someone behind the scenes, like some of the medical practitioners they're being advised by? Like, who do you think this is like ultimately coming from?
For me, ultimately, it's a WHO directive. It's a top-down directive. Do I think that they know? I don't think all of them know. I think that it's their job to know. They are paid to know. They're paid to advocate on our behalf, and they are completely failing us. It's not okay to say that I didn't know when you're paid to know. There is so many people like myself. I could name 20 offhand who have made it almost a full-time job to find out the information and finding out, particularly Kathy Gray, Jonathan Michael, they have passed this information on to them. So if somebody, and this is their own information, a freedom of information is asking them access to the documents that they have access to anyway. So when you're collating that and handing it back to them and they're not taking the time to read it, then it becomes negligent. Robin Swan said it was going to be a pandemic of biblical proportions. He never put that back. Instead, he tried to maintain the emergency powers to the bitter end until he could. So that's not a case of not knowing, because you have all the data to know. Mike Nesbitt refused to attend the FIBS meeting. FIBS met with the First and Deputy First Minister about a month ago, I think, and they also had a couple of months ago, and they also had a meeting in the Long Gallery on the 14th of October. This is the people who, and you could have heard a pin drop when you were listening to the stories of those who had been injured, and you really were sitting there going, but for the grace of God. That was in the belly of the beast of Stormont, and a lot of them didn't even bother to attend. This is the people that they're claiming to represent. We're just asking them to do their job, and we're actually doing their job for them. So it's not, I don't know if they know entirely, but they should know. And if they don't know, when they realize that they didn't know, they should leave their positions for negligence.
Wow, it's quite damning. Hopefully they do, but I really doubt it. It's nice to see at least one person in the assembly fight back in Paul Froo, who's like actually standing up for people. I have the utmost respect for that man above any other politician in Northern Ireland, against through the entire pandemic and against the wishes and opinions of many in his own party. So like much respect to Paul Froo for everything he's done for people who've been injured by the COVID vaccine, and generally just for like actually providing a voice in the assembly for people who are at the very least skeptical of these new powers that are being implemented and of the emergency powers that were given during the pandemic. I want to go back to something you said earlier about assets and what the current economy is sort of in a death spiral, essentially, that the financialization has become too much. So it's something I've written a lot about, like the financialization of the economy. There's a great book called The Finance Curse, which I reference quite a lot on the show, by Nicholas Shaxson. So it basically talks about like the financial sector of any economy being similar or almost identical to a resource curse that would come from a place like say Angola in Africa. They're cursed with a lot of oil, and therefore it sucks in resources for them. It takes all their best graduates straight into, you know, the oil industry instead of, say, maybe going into like medicine or physics or anything. They get sucked straight towards the like absolute most profitable single industry that a country has. And he argues basically that places like Britain, America, and much of Western Europe are increasingly being swallowed up by financial institutions and the impact. So, what is it that you think means that the assets have basically become that they're going for an asset grab? Like, what are you point at when you're making those claims?
Well, look at what they're doing. Lloyds have become landlords. BlackRock have become landlords. You have Bill Gates buying up land. You have the recent budget. The government are trying to destroy generational farming in order to own the farms. And if you look at the average age of a farmer, you're going to get between the UK and Wales, you're going to get ages between 55 and 60. So, what in 20 years max, they're going to own 20% of all that property because they can't afford to. They're going to have to put it onto the open market. They have made it increasingly more difficult now with the stamp duty for people to buy a home. They have reduced the threshold. So they're making it more difficult for people to actually own assets. So it's more difficult to own them. Who is going to own them? Who is going to come in and buy them up? Asset management companies. It's not going to be the government. The government is broke as we are. So we're moving into a feudal system where a small percentage own absolutely everything, and people need to kind of be aware of this. For me, the recent budget was in favour of asset management companies, not of regular people. Even by increasing, people are happy that the minimum wage is going up, but the threshold for paying taxes isn't going up, which means that you just get more taxes. It was just a budget to get more taxes from the people and allow asset management firms to come in and buy up more property because it's going to be coming onto the market and nobody else can afford to buy it but them.
Honing in on the farmers specifically, like, do you think they're attempting to price out people from farming as soon as someone dies and they want to pass it on to the next generation? Is that their goal?
I think so. Well, that would really seem, if you know that it's an aging demographic, you know that in 20 years, it's going to start blowing up now because those farmers are coming to retirement age. Mm-hmm. So they have the option of passing it on to the next generation. You have 7 years before you can pass it on. But should they die, I mean, on a farm, can they afford to pay $250,000 towards the farm? Mm-hmm. And farmers, it's a passion that they have. There's big farmers that make a lot of money. Small farmers don't really make that much money. And there's the generational knowledge within farming. Once you lose that, it's very difficult to pick up on that again. So I think we're seeing evidence for a lot of land grabs. And for me, that's just explicitly a land grab.
Yeah.
And they're going after landlords as well with second home. Yeah.
So what you think they're trying to cut out, like, sort of like individual landlords who maybe own one other property or like one or two other properties and like they're favoring.
So they've been doing that with section. Yeah, you have section. Yes, you have section 21. Sorry, you cannot read it there. Sorry. You have section 21, section 24 against landlords. And so that's previous. So landlords were bailing out in their droves because of anticipation of what was to come based on what they're experiencing right now. So that's why rents are sky high. And it's not only that rents are sky high, people can't find somewhere to rent because landlords are leaving. And a lot of people it's not that they're these slum landlords, they've bought one or two properties as an investment for their pension rather than delegate their pension into pension funds, BlackRock, etc. So they're making it increasingly difficult for them to do that in order to allow Lloyds. And we've seen it during the lockdown in America. BlackRock come in and just bought. They bought up all the mortgages. So it would seem that that's what they're allowing to happen here by making it difficult for you to have a rental property, that it's more costly, that it's not, there's no end game in it, because you might have put down, say, a £30,000 deposit. The rent that you get goes straight to the mortgage company, and at the end of 20 years, then you have something that generates an income. And that's what so many small people are doing. They've made that financially now impossible. And it's just going to be passed on to rents. And then you're at the mercy of most small landlords, particularly in Northern Ireland. They're good landlords. You have a relationship with your tenant, and they're good landlords. They wouldn't if there's an issue, they address the issue, because as a landlord, it's valuable to have a good tenant. You want to keep a good tenant. But now it's just going to be, these big companies that you're phoning up and you can't get an answer, and you've mold, and they won't do anything for you. And that's what we're moving towards. And it's going to be more and more difficult in the meantime for people to buy anywhere or rent anywhere.
Yeah, it's worrying. Anyway, Melissa, we have, taken up enough of your time. So is there anything that you'd like to plug just before we wrap up here?
Nothing I'd like to plug. I would encourage people, particularly with this Northern Ireland Health Bill, they got it in through Scotland with ease. It wasn't noticed. We have picked up on it. We have a chance to fight. And it is a case of fight like your life and liberty depend on it. Because if you read this document, your life and liberty do depend on it. So this, in my opinion, is going to be won at the level of the MLAs. So contact your MLAs, read through it, cipher through it. I will be posting updates on social media every single week, encouraging people to contact their MLA with, say, a particular point, say the point 126. Well, if you're planning to go in and debate that, what will you be debating? What will be your stance on that? And then that encourages people to become increasingly aware of what they're planning within this. And it allows the MLAs to know that people are aware. And then they're going to have to start acting on our behalf instead of, we don't know, it wasn't our fault, we didn't realize, or getting orders from above.
Yeah. I think most people don't read the legislation. I think, most MLAs don't read the legislation either that they end up debating, unfortunately.
It certainly would appear so, because it might as it says he wasn't in favour of forced vaccination. Meanwhile, there's 3 explicit points within this bill that would state that they will be mandated. So has he not read it, or why would he possibly be saying that?
Worrying. Anyway, I'll put your Twitter in the description and a link to any of the stuff we've discussed, the public health bill, the Canadian one, and anything else that I remember that we've talked about. So thanks very much, Melissa. The Scottish one as well,
Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. Thank you very much. Hey, listeners, real quick. Do you ever find yourself sitting watching the stock market like this? Well, now you could instead be ordering my book like this. It's the story of GameStop. You can purchase it with a hoodie, with acknowledgements, or just with the early backers edition. It's all about the GameStop story. It's the real story, not just what you've seen on films. It's exactly what has happened over the last 3.5 years. And with DFE back, I'm finally able to draw a conclusion to my book. Please pre-order it. It really helps me out, and you will get it eventually, I promise. Hopefully this year.